They're among the most memorable phrases of the last 50 years. I want a kinder, gentler nation. So said George Herbert Walker Bush. Here's Reagan at the anniversary of D-Day, Ronald Reagan, at the anniversary of D-Day in Normandy. These are the boys of Pointe-du-Hoc. These are the men who took the cliffs. These are the champions who helped free a continent. These are the heroes who helped end a war. And here's Reagan after the Challenger disaster. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. While Peggy Noonan, in her self-effacing, gracious way, will never admit to their authorship, we all know that before those words were the words of presidents, they were the words of an Irish Catholic girl from Massapequa, Long Island, a scribe, a thinker, an essayist, an imp named Margaret Ellen Noonan, but now just simply Peggy. Reagan may have been the great communicator, but Peggy was the great communicator's communicator. Like Mozart, she was the court composer, Reagan's Amadeus, as she captured the voice of a world leader, the imagination of the public, and the mood of the time. Reagan's Challenger address and his talk at Pointe-du-Hoc have both been just selected by scholars and historians to rank among the best speeches of the 20th century. But Peggy's career as a speechwriter was just the second movement of the symphony of her life. The first was at CBS, where I first met her, when she was the writer of another great communicator of the century, Dan Rather. Putting together his daily radio commentaries, I'd be surprised if many of you knew that, Peggy learned to write smart, to write on deadline, and somehow to write like a 6-foot Texan and an anchorman who liked to pick fights with Republicans. I can only imagine what kind of adjustment issues she had to deal with going from Dan to Dutch at the White House. Now that's a pivot. In her spare time, Peggy writes best-selling books, 8 of them so far, including the White House memoir to beat all White House memoirs, What I Saw at the Revolution. No one had ever written an insider account of a presidency like that. It was a poetic portrait, and it became an instant classic. Her third chapter is still happening. Peggy as pundit, writing her weekly jewels for the Wall Street Journal. After years of writing in someone else's voice, we learn that the most compelling and incisive voice is her own. She has been eloquent, profound, inspirational, challenging, funny, and smart, with columns that are above all impeccably fair-minded, as she implores us to just lower the temperature. But what is most striking about her words is their unfailing sense of optimism. In our time of division and cynicism and rage, when political discourse is so often reduced to shouting matches, Peggy writes with civility and hope. She once said, "A speech reminds us that words, like children, have the power to make dance the dullest beanbag of a heart." I think I can speak for a lot of us when I say, thank you, Peggy, for inviting us to the dance.
Oh, thank you, Lesley. I found your introduction almost embarrassingly flattering. But that's because I wrote it. That's actually not true. Actually, Lesley and I did a funny thing backstage. We traded speeches. She just gave the speech I wrote. I'm now about to give the speech she wrote. I certainly hope it's good, but if it's not, you know. Lesley, I think, is one of the great journalists of our age, not one of the great woman journalists. I mean, one of the great journalists, full stop. She has unshowily, in a way, been having one of the great careers in American broadcasting. She's also been one of the best friends to me anybody could ask for. As for the other recipients and the introducers, to paraphrase President Kennedy, this may be the most extraordinary collection of female talent and knowledge ever to come together at the Waldorf Astoria, with the possible exception of the night Eleanor Roosevelt dined here alone. Glenn Close liked my joke. I've never been able to say that sentence. Thank you, Glenn. Okay, I am honored to receive this Matrix Award, in part because it is a prize for women, from women, and as such it has very great meaning for me, and obviously it's very timely. Somebody a moment ago was speaking of the chatter in political and media circles about what has been called a war against women. I happen to think a war against women is a bad idea. As I look around also at all the brilliance and energy and courage in this room, all I've got to say to whoever's declared war on us is, good luck, buddy, you're gonna need it. Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. All right, in connection to that, some very quick thoughts. I want to mention a conversation I had yesterday. I was talking yesterday morning with Susan Collins, the United States Senator from the state of Maine. She's someone I've met before, but I did not know. She was a guest on the Sunday morning show this week. I was later going to be on the panel on that show. We saw each other in the hallway, and we sat down and talked for a few minutes. Normally, in a green room before a show like that, people talk about politics and sort of inside stuff. There's a lot of, I hear Boehner put a stop on the bill, that kind of stuff. And that's fine. But Senator Collins and I started to go over our notes together. It turned out we're both keeping notes for the show. And we started chatting, and suddenly we were talking about how no matter how often you do a big news show, it's always a challenge, and it doesn't get less so with time. She said to me, and it was so undefended, she said, I've done lots of interviews, and I still get nervous. And I told her, I do too. And we talked about why. And she said, you know, often we're the only woman on the set or on the panel. And you want to be good because you don't want to let the other women down. You don't want to let down the women who are watching and who are kind of pulling for you and want you to do well. I suspect every one of us up here has felt a little, along the way, a little of that kind of responsibility, which is also, I think, a feeling of connection, that we're all in this together. The Senator Collins, was about to go on the set to talk about the big Secret Service story that has been happening for the past week. And as she got up to leave, she turned to me and she said, by the way, it was a woman who found out what was going on and who exposed it. And our eyes kind of locked for a moment, and it was like, girl power, you know? it was like the 80s. Anyway, all nations can make progress. We have progress to be made. But today, I was thinking this morning, I got here myself without having to be accompanied by a male family member. I'm wearing clothes that, for better or for worse, I picked out for myself. I'm reading remarks I wrote myself, and I feel no constraints as to what to say. And all of these things, as we know, would be criminal acts in some sadder parts of the world. I am a columnist for a newspaper, a great one in my view, the Wall Street Journal. There isn't a day I don't feel privileged to be part of it and to have this thing we're all so used to, free speech, and to be able to use it unfettered. No one has ever asked me on that paper not to say something, and I've taken many positions that were the opposite of the newspapers, of the editorial boards, or of the editorial pages. No one has ever removed a criticism, no matter how sharply put or even too sharply put. No one has ever asked me to tone down any support for someone who isn't perhaps generally seen as sympathetic at the moment. I say my piece and I take whatever blows or compliments follow. I often think of something the great New York Times columnist Bill Sapphire told me back 20 years ago before I had a column. Somehow he knew that I would, and he was a great encourager of women. He was a great gentleman in that regard, because great gentlemen are encouragers of women. He told me never to pile on. He said, don't knock people when they're down, knock them when they're up. He did. He told me to read. He said, if you want to rise, you have to read, because you need the distance and context and information that reading gives you. Bill said that years before the age of minute-by-minute media and tweets and blogs and posts and all that stuff. But what he said then is even more true today. Julia Louis-Dreyfus was on David Letterman last week, and she talked about how she's just begun to tweet. And Letterman asked her what the whole Twitterverse universe seemed like to her, and she said, it's like walking into a room with 1,000 people, and they're all screaming their opinions at you. In other words, she said, it's like walking into what used to be called a lunatic asylum. She said she was trying each day to find the 2 or 3 people who, in her view, were sort of worth listening to. I would say if you want to be one of those people worth listening to, bring context and grounding and knowledge to your work and decisions. In other words, read. No matter what you do for a living, you must at times detach, absorb, and ponder. Finally, Bill told me to have a philosophy of work. Here, quickly, is mine. Try to see with clean eyes, with clear eyes, what's around you. Try to apprehend the facts, the trends, the way people are. We're human. We're not just policy-driven, data-spouting talking point machines, no matter what you see on cable. We are not just aggregates of ambition. We are full human persons. So, tell the story. Try to be fair. Try to be honest. Don't smuggle in your personal political philosophy. Announce it up front. Declare it. Tell people where you stand and why. Don't hide it. This shows respect. And people can take it. They don't mind if they disagree with you. They're trying to be fair, too. They mind it, and they rightly resent it, if they have to smoke out your real views, your real stands, your agenda. But don't let your views color what you see. Don't let your opinion on a story distort your telling of it. Don't throw knuckleballs and sliders. Throw the ball straight and hard as you can. If you can do all that, you'll make a place for yourself in what can be a magnificent profession, and one that, at its best, is actually a modest public service. Thank you.